I was trained as a scientist. My background's in the hard sciences, physical sciences, the earth sciences. In the 60s and 70s, when I received that training, there was no room for the possibility of the kind of things that we're talking about now, the kinds of things that suggest that our inner world and our inner thoughts, feelings, emotions, beliefs in any way affect the world around us. And it was through direct experience. What I began to understand was that this is the great secret that everyone knows except us in the West. Almost any other culture that we go to, from the monasteries in Egypt and Tibet and India into Bolivia and Peru, the indigenous traditions, little villages in the Andes Mountains, they all know that there is this experience that we can have inside of our bodies that affects our world in some way, and our science simply has not allowed for that historically. Well, I was trained as a scientist, and I was trained to look in the world around me for my answers, so I began to go to these places. I began to go into the monasteries, all the places that I mentioned. And it was through the direct experience of sitting in the presence of people who have lived and practiced the kinds of traditions that Louise Hay and the other authors I'm so blessed to be sharing this, the stage and this information with, that they teach about. And what we begin to understand is that this is the place where science got it wrong. There are two places, two assumptions that science has made, modern science. And they're coming full circle and correcting that now. But the first one is that the space that we believe is empty is not really so empty. It's full of a living essence, of a living material that we're only beginning to understand, number one. And number two, the fact, and it is a fact now, that we may have experiences inside of our bodies that influence the world beyond our bodies through the conduit of what's in this space. So it was in going into the monasteries and the nunneries and speaking with the indigenous people, looking at them eye to eye, heart to heart, God to God, and I could say to these people, when you just perform that miracle, when you just perform that miraculous healing, what is it that you did inside of your body to make that happen? And if I didn't understand what they told me, I'd ask them again and again and again through the translators until I understood that they were creating an experience, producing an effect inside of their bodies that my science never told me was possible or existed. And that was the path that led me. I just want to emphasize, science is good. And I believe our science is good and served us well. It simply is incomplete. And so it was that path that allowed me to flesh out the missing pieces that we're only beginning to understand today, marrying the best science of our time with the wisdom, 5,000 years of wisdom of our past, into a greater understanding. And that understanding brings us right back to the question. That's a long answer to a short question. But it brings us back to where we're only now beginning to understand that there is something that we can do in our lives that influence not only the physical body, ours and those of other people around us, but literally influence the physical reality of our world, and that changes everything. It changes everything that we in the West believe about ourselves. So as a scientist, I've also come to understand this is a very different way for many people to think about themselves and their world. And I've found that there's a learning curve that our audiences and our friends and families and coworkers in my career at the Water Fountain, this is not something that people typically talk about in a technical organization. They don't wake up in the morning and say, what kinds of feelings, what kinds of dreams, what kinds of healings did you have over the weekend? And they're talking about who won the football game and who won the lotteries. But this is where it brings us, the relevance in our lives, because we all are having experiences every day. Whether we are consciously aware of it or not, those experiences are physically affecting our bodies and our world. What Western science now is beginning to understand, only in the last years of the 20th and now the first years of the 21st century, it is now a scientific fact that the space between things is anything but empty. It is full of a living, pulsating essence that is so new, scientists have yet to agree on a single term. Some are calling it a quantum hologram, very technical sounding name. Dr. Edgar Mitchell, the former Apollo astronaut, I've had the honor of sharing the stage with him a number of times. He calls it nature's mind. Stephen Hawking calls it the mind of God. Others simply call it the field. In 1944, the father of quantum physics, Max Planck, identified the existence of this field, and he called it the matrix. He said, underlying everything that we see, our bodies included, everything we see in the world around us in our bodies, he said, there is the existence of what must be a conscious and intelligent mind. This is his language in 1944. He said that this mind is the matrix of all matter, and it's from his work that the movie series began and many of the ideas that we have today. So what we know is this, is that we have the opportunity to influence that field in ways now that we're only beginning to understand. It's done through the human heart. It's not a thinking process. Thoughts are important. The ancients made a distinction between thoughts and feelings and emotions. And it's the feelings that are centered in our heart, what are called coherent, heart-based emotions. We know that when we feel a feeling of love, compassion, understanding, forgiveness, when we change the self-esteem, that there's an effect from that it changes the electrical and the magnetic fields in our heart, and that those fields literally change the stuff that our world is made of around our bodies. Our hearts are the strongest magnetic field in our bodies, and our hearts are the strongest electrical field in our bodies, much more so than the brain. While the brain does create those kinds of fields, the heart is many times stronger. And what the science now is showing is that when you can change the field that the atom is in, you change the atom. And we're made of those atoms. So when we have feelings in our hearts, we're changing the field that connects the stuff everything is made of, and we literally are altering our physical reality in ways that sound miraculous in Western science. But again, this is the great secret everyone knows except us, because Western science has only arrived at this understanding. You go to these ancient and indigenous traditions and cultures, it's where they begin. They begin with the understanding, sure, everything's connected, and sure, we're part of it. And then they take us one step further and they say, here, I'll show you. I'll show you how to create the effects in your body so that you can heal your body and you can heal the bodies of others. You can change your self-esteem and your body will mirror that change. It doesn't have to be a long, slow, drawn-out process. It can happen very, very quickly. It can happen in a matter of minutes. We have video documentation from medicineless hospitals in Beijing, China, for example, where they understand these practices and they've employed them for several thousand years. And we can look into the body of a living woman with a cancerous tumor that Western science says is inoperable. And then we can watch as three practitioners that understand the language of human emotion. They create the feeling in their bodies. They're not looking at that tumor as an illness. They see that woman as whole, healthy, vital, completely enabled, fully capacitated. And as they feel that feeling strongly among themselves, her physical body mirrors that. And we can see it through sonograms. We can see that tumor disappear in less than 3 minutes. And that's how quickly reality can change. And this is where the disconnect comes in with Western science. Because I've shared this information with scientists and medical doctors all over the world, and they say, wow, that's a miracle. We're going to have to come back and study this, and we will as soon as we find a cure for cancer, or as soon as we find the cure to cure on the mechanical level, what they see as a mechanical process. And what we now know is our physical body is the outpicturing, is the mirror of something that is not so physical. And this is where science now is only arriving. The three practitioners in the medicineless hospital in Beijing did not judge that cancerous tumor. They didn't judge it right, wrong, good, or bad. They said it's a quantum possibility, and there are many possibilities. Of course, this is just one. They said, now we're going to choose another one. But this is a subtle and very, very different way of looking at things, because they acknowledge what is and invite a new possibility rather than having a charge on what is there and feeling that somehow we have to manipulate or cut out, in the case of a tumor, or change, hammer the physical reality into submission. What they're doing is acknowledging that moment, that example, and they're changing it on the level of what we would call the quantum blueprint. They're feeling the feeling as if another possibility has occurred, and in doing so, allowing that possibility to replace the one that exists without judging the one that exists. I was an aerospace engineer in Denver, Colorado during the last years of the Cold War, the 1980s, and it was when the famous brown cloud was inundating Denver, and we couldn't all drive on the same days. We had to carpool on different days. And one day I went to an engineer friend's house to do my carpool for that week. And I got there a little early. And I'd never been to his house before, and I said, "Can I use your bathroom?" And I went in there, and he had little Post-it notes of affirmations all over the bathroom, and it said, "My perfect mate is manifesting for me now. My perfect mate is manifesting for me now." We got in his car, and he had little Post-it notes all over the dashboard in the rearview mirror. "My perfect mate is manifesting for me now." And of course, I knew what his office looked like, and it was the same way. He had them all over the walls in the CRT. I said, "Does this affirmation work for you?" He said, "Nah." He said, "It never does." And I said, "Why do you think that is?" And he said, well, look at me. Who'd want to be with somebody like me? I'm just an engineer, you know. He had a very low self-esteem about himself. And I began to think about the way that he was applying those affirmations, and other people have applied them very successfully. And what I found the difference was, for him, it was a thought process that never went beyond what was happening in his mind, in his own picturing, his own self-esteem. And the thought is important. The ancients are very clear about this in the Sanskrit text. They tell us that the thought is the image of the quantum possibility. So in other words, in the realm of all possibilities, everything already exists. My friend's perfect relationship and the worst one he'll ever have. The lightest of the light, the darkest of the dark. Our greatest healing and our greatest suffering, they're already there. And what they invite us to do in these ancient traditions is to reach into those possibilities with our mind. This is the power of the mind. And isolate, we lock in one of those possibilities. So now we have taken it and identified it. However, to bring it into this world, to breathe life into that possibility, is the power of human emotion. Our love for that possibility, or our fear of that possibility, either one will work. To bring that quantum possibility into the particle reality of our everyday lives. We don't have to know that. It sounds very technical. We just have a feeling. But this is the science of, appears to be the science of how these things are working. So this is why our self-esteem is so important. When we feel, when my engineer friend felt that, why would anybody want to be with me, is what he said to me. The affirmation for him was an empty affirmation. It was a thought that had no energy to invite it into this world. And an example of just the opposite of that is, I know of other people who have simply made a list of all of the attributes of a perfect partner in life, because this is what many people, I'm using as an example. It works in healing, it works in peace, but we're talking about relationships. They make a list of all those attributes, and then they come from the place that relationship is already happening. What is their life like? How is their life different now that perfect partner is there? How is their evening different? How do they spend their time differently? How do they feel when they wake up in the morning and share their lives with someone? And it's those feelings that they live throughout the day. It's not something you sit down and do for a minute and then you get up and walk away. Rather, it's something that we become. We live our lives as if these experiences have already happened, and in that way we invite them into our lives, and they happen frighteningly quickly for some people. It's amazing. I know people that haven't finished their list, and they go out for lunch or a cup of coffee while they're making the list, and the person that just brought them their lunch is the person that's on that list, and they fall in love and they're married 20 years later. I know people that's happened to. So it's about clarity. It's about specificity. It's about being personal, being very clear that these are personal desires. Scientifically, it appears that this field, the divine matrix, it is a mirror and a bridge between our inner and our outer worlds. And it can only give us what we give it to work with. And the interesting thing is that we have been conditioned to feel the feelings of the things that we don't want in life and that we're afraid of. We wake up in the morning and we see the 6 o'clock news and all the things to be afraid of, and then we go through our day saying, oh, I hope I'm not going to see that today, or I hope it's not around the corner. And my question, so fascinating me, where do we learn to feel the things that we don't want rather than things that we choose to have? And how would our lives be different if we could cut through all of the static and simply choose in our lives what we would like each moment of each day, or our relationships, or our abundance, or our careers, or the peace in our families to look like? What would our lives look like if we could do that? And there's very good scientific evidence showing precisely what our lives would look like, because we would very quickly experience everything that we've created. As a scientist, one of the first things I had to understand, and again, my training, I was trained in the hard sciences, and there was no allowance for any inner experience to have an effect on our outer world to begin with. Number two, I was raised in a relatively conservative community in the Midwest. I was born in Missouri, Kansas City, Missouri. Excuse me. In that part of the world, when you talk about emotions, they kind of get lumped into this nebulous experience. You know, thoughts, feelings, emotions are all the same thing. We really don't talk about them much. And by the way, as a male, we don't want to see much of yours. So that was my upbringing. So I began to understand when we go into the other cultures, and I'm referring again and again to this wisdom. We had this wisdom in Western cultures, and it was lost in the 4th century. About 1,700 years ago, it was edited right out of our most cherished spiritual and religious traditions, the biblical edits of the 4th century. It was not edited from the other cultures that we've visited, and that's the value of going into these cultures. And they identify 3 separate yet related experiences that we all have in our bodies, and they literally call them thought, feeling, and emotion. And here's the difference. The thinking they identify with the 3 upper energy centers of the body. The Sanskrit traditions have a 7 energy center or 7 chakra system that they work with. And they say the upper 3 are related to what we call thought or logic processes. So when we think about something, we picture it in our mind, that perfect relationship or peace between nations. But we can only invite it into our lives when we breathe the power of emotion into that thought. The emotion comes from the lower 3 of those creative centers in our bodies. So when we breathe the power of emotion into our thought, we imbue that thought with life. And those 2 energies meet in the one center that is not accounted for yet in our model. It's in our heart, or what scientists call the 7-layer liquid crystal oscillator in the center of our chest. But we'll just call it our heart, because that's what it does. Our heart is creating electrical and magnetic waves that are influencing the world around us based on what we think and the emotion that we breathe into those thoughts to create the feeling. So now we've just defined feeling. Feeling, by definition, from the Sanskrit tradition, is the union of thought and emotion. It creates the feeling. Now what makes this really interesting is that those traditions say we are capable of only 2 primary emotions: love and whatever we feel the opposite of love is. And when you get really deep into the teachings, there are 2 aspects of the same thing. But what they say is when we have our thought, we are either breathing the love of that thought or our fear of that thought to create the feeling. And the feeling then becomes sadness or joy or compassion or anger. Those are not emotions, those are feelings. Now for some people they say, well, you know, you're nitpicking. What difference could it make? And these are the subtle differences between these ancient ways of viewing this inner technology. It's literally a technology, because we can have the same thought or the same affirmation and imbue it with a different emotion and have completely different feelings and create a different outcome. And this is the great secret that was edited out of our Christian and pre-Christian Judeo-Christian traditions. When 45 books were removed in the 4th century, 20 were taken out completely. Another 25 were condensed and rearranged. And we know this because we found the information now in the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Nag Hammadi Library, the Coptic dynastic texts. So we know what those texts would have said if we had had them. But the interesting thing is, without those texts, we tend to rely upon the written word, the validation, to feel that power in our bodies. I think everyone senses or suspects that there's an untapped potential in the human body. I've been on every continent of the earth, and I've asked every audience I've ever been in, do you feel that that's there? And they say, yes, we feel there's something there, but we just can't quite get it. Why is that? So we have a feeling that there's more to us, but we rely on a written validation in a 5,000-year-old text or a scientific study to tell us that it's true. And this is, I think, the value of going into those texts, is we get to see the words that literally say, in the Gospel of Thomas, the lost Gospel of Thomas, it literally says, when these 2 become one, when thought and emotion become one, then you'll say to the mountain, move, and the mountain will move. And I used to think that that was a metaphor. And I now have seen enough to know that moving a cancerous tumor inside the body of a living woman That's moving a mountain to me. And it's all done from marrying thought and emotion together. 1998, I had my first journey into the highlands of central China and Tibet. And it was during that time we were given a personal audience with an abbot, who's an elderly leader of a particular sect in the monastery. And this abbot passed just a couple of years ago, so I'm glad that we spoke with him when we did. And it was this man, I asked the question that I asked every monk, every nun, I asked the shaman in Peru and Bolivia, but I had the clearest response from this man. And I asked him a question. I said, when we see your prayers on the outside, and we see you in the chanting hall for 12, 16, 18 hours a day, and we see the bells and the bowls and the mudras and the mantras and the gongs and the chimes and the incense, when we see your prayers on the outside, I said, what are you doing on the inside? And this was the man that looked at me. He said, you've never seen our prayers, because a prayer cannot be seen. He said, what you see are the things we do to create the feeling in our body, and the feeling is the prayer. And then he turned the question on me, and he said, how do you do this in your culture? Through a translator. And I began to think about this and realize that when we lost the words in our most cherished spiritual traditions that tell us that feeling is a language that speaks to our bodies in this world, and we lost the words that validated that, we began to think that the words themselves were the prayers, and if we say, or the affirmations, and if we say those words the right number of times, the right time of day or the right time of year, that we've said our prayer or our affirmation, and then if it doesn't work, we get frustrated and we say, well, my prayer didn't work, or my affirmation's not working for me, because we lost the link with feeling and emotion. When I was in the monasteries in Tibet, and the abbot had passed, a new abbot took his place who was already in his mid-80s. He's the new young abbot. He's already in his mid-80s. And I asked him a question, and this was in 2005, we just went back. And I asked him a question, and I said, what is the force in your tradition, in your belief system? What is the force that connects the universe? What's the force that holds everything together? And through the translator, he answered me with one word. And I thought I heard it incorrectly. And I said, would you do that again? And he came back and he answered me with one word, and he said, compassion. And I said, well, wait a minute. I said, is compassion a force that holds everything together, or is it a feeling that we experience in our bodies? And he said, yes. And that was very powerful for me to understand that, because it says that we have the ability to feel in our bodies the stuff that holds this universe together. And we're really not so different from those quantum particles in the stars beyond us, or in the tumor that's in front of us, in the suffering of our loved ones, or in the peace between the nations. It's all part of the same thing. The challenge is to make it more than an intellectual exercise. How do we know we're part of all that is? One of the ways that helped me come to that realization, there was an experiment that was done in 1997 in Geneva, Switzerland. Made world headlines. 3,500 reporters from the science journals were there. They documented this experiment, and it didn't make the cover of Time magazine or USA Today, although I think it should have. And what the experiment showed, the bottom line, was that when you take the stuff our world is made of, a particle of matter, one particle, and even if you split that particle and send each portion to different locations, which is what this experiment did. They split one particle of matter and sent one particle 7 miles this direction, the other 7 miles that direction. They were 14 miles apart, and even though they were separated physically, they were still connected energetically. So that when one particle had an experience, they would disturb one particle, the other one acted like it was having the experience. Sometimes the other one would act like it was having the experience before the scientist even disturbed the first particle. And it's mind-boggling. He said, well, how can this be? But what this tells us is that once matter is physically joined, even when it becomes separate, the energy is still there that's connecting it. And this is why it's important to me, because if we go back far enough in time, all the particles of matter of this entire universe that are expanding were all meshed together in a single particle about the size of a green pea, is what scientists tell us today. It's what the computer models suggest. That if you could go into the universe today and take all the particles of matter and take out all the space in between and bring it together and compress it into a size of a single green pea, it means that you and me and every one of our listeners, we were all once part of that same particle that creates this whole universe today. And even though those particles are now separate and expanding, and studies show that they are, energetically we're all still linked. When we lost the information telling us we're a part of all that we see, we found ourselves on a very technological path without the wisdom of us being in the equation. So we thought that's the world out there and that we're separate from that world. Now what's happened is our technology has come so far that our very existence is threatened by the technology that we've developed, whether it's the wars or the viruses or the climate change. So I believe we've come full circle. Now, to survive our time in history, we've got to write ourselves back into the equation. Our prayers, our affirmations, our beliefs, our language. And when they're spoken through the language of the heart, they have a direct, powerful, and immediate impact on our bodies and the world around us. And it invites us to be very, very aware of what it is that we truly hold in our hearts as is the truth of our world, because we live that in our lives, from the lightest of the light to the darkest of the dark, the greatest fears and the greatest joys. What we're beginning to understand is that human emotion and feeling and belief is literally a language. It's a non-verbal language that this field recognizes and understands. And the field works in what we call real time. It doesn't know about a few minutes from now. So if you say in your affirmation, 20 minutes from now, I'd like for my perfect mate to manifest for me now, it doesn't know about 20 minutes from now. It is a real-time application. And this is why the key, and this is what the ancients say, and this is what the monks and the nuns tell us real-time today. They say to be very specific about what it is that we're choosing to have in our lives, because what we're doing, and it helps if we understand this, what we're doing is in the world of quantum possibility, in the soup, the nebulous soup of all possibilities, what we're doing is we're isolating, we're locking one into place. And if we're not specific about what that possibility is, then how can the field be specific about what it is that it gives to us? Whatever it takes to get us to the point where we can transcend the limits, the laws of physics and biology as we've known them in the past. We have a power within us that transcends those laws, that we're more than our mistakes, that we're more than the suffering, we're more than the limits that we believed in the past. And that is where I say, wow, that really inspires me.
Seems like the intentions that we have, even when we're 1 year, 2 years, 3 and 4 years old, all get played out in the end as our life evolves. And they get played out in ways that we often don't understand. Unless you have a good memory of what you wanted when you were 3 or 4, you often don't remember that what you were asking for then you now have. And I've watched my life evolve to everything I've ever wanted is happening. You know, it has happened along the way, and it is happening. And I guess the reason I think it's important for people to know that, I really want people to know that there's nothing that they can't be or do or have, and that there's nothing they can't change to or from if they want to, and where there's no one's locked in anywhere. And also, those so-called dreams or daydreams you had when you were really little of the beautiful, wonderful things you wanted to be or do or do for the world and so on and so forth, they all come true. But they don't necessarily come true in the way you may have envisioned them. But if you look back, you'll say, oh, that's the essence of everything I ever wanted. It's here. Or everything I was ever afraid of, it's also here. Esther, how about you bringing Abraham in and let Abraham visit for a few minutes here?
Okay.
It just takes her a moment. Esther just kind of relaxes her mind, and actually you're going to see it. She just kind of relaxes, and nothing major happens. It's just she just allows this other energy more or less to move through her.
It is nice to have an opportunity to visit.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it is the single most important thing that you consciously do, because the thought that you are thinking, a belief is just a thought you keep thinking, isn't it? So the thought that you are thinking is vibrational in nature and therefore attractive in nature. So if you have a habit of thought, a belief, which is therefore a dominant thought, which is therefore a big part of your vibrational offering. Therefore, it is a big part of your point of attraction. So when you care enough to take the time to change it from what you are terming negative to positive, you have shifted your point of attraction. Nothing is more important than understanding that. We would like to help you to remember that you are more than you see here in this physical body, and that that larger part of you is always eternally offering a powerful vantage point and vibration. When you come forth into your physical body, a part of that consciousness flows into this personality that you know as you. So, at all times when you are in your physical form, you have the potential of offering a thought that causes alignment with that broader part of you, or not. And we would say the thoughts that you offer that are in vibrational harmony or alignment with that larger part of you would be that state of integrity that you are looking for, coming together with that broader part of me. It's also important to remember that that larger part of you, that eternal part of you, exists even while you are in your physical form. In other words, often people think, well, you are dead or alive, you are physical or non-physical, but you are eternally that non-physical source energy. And then you are sometimes this physical human energy. And those 2 points of vibrations, that eternal part that is pure positive energy, and that physical part that could be, as you say, negative, or could be, as you say, positive at any moment, those vibrational vantage points are always playing off of one another. The better you feel, the more you are vibrationally in integrity to that which you are. Vibrational integrity is alignment with that which I am. So, reaching for good feeling thoughts is really the key to coming into alignment with that which you are. And we think that's the best description of integrity that could be. Your feelings are the way you quantify your journey from sickness to wellness. The way you feel is the way you quantify your journey from not enough money to enough money. You must have a way of understanding where you are in relationship to what you want. And because more than 99% of every creation is completed vibrationally before you see any physical evidence, you can't use the physical evidence to know. If you have an illness and you want to be well, you may have found many thoughts that have improved your point of attraction, and you may be vibrationally well along the way to your recovery. But because the physical manifestation has not yet shown itself, if you stop and take score of where you are physically, you may very well become upset because the tests do not give you the affirming confirmation that you are on your way to wellness. Where if you understand that your emotions are giving you that feedback, then even though the manifestation has not shown you your recovery, the fact that you feel so much better is your indication that you are moving in the right direction. And if you continue to move in the right direction, your recovery must be. As Jerry and Esther travel from Phoenix to San Diego, they never get out there in the desert halfway and become so frustrated that they are not yet in San Diego that they become disoriented and turn around and go back to Phoenix. It would be a very long journey, wouldn't it? Phoenix, Yuma, Phoenix, Yuma, Phoenix, Yuma. And the reason that doesn't happen is because they understand where they are in relationship to where they want to be. Your emotions are the only way you can accurately understand where you are in relationship to where you want to be. Once you get that down, and you do as Joseph Campbell said, you learn to follow your bliss, now you always have guidance, you see. You are eternal beings, and your journey never ends. And you've deliberately come forth into this physical time-space reality because you understood that the contrast would inspire you to new ideas. And you knew that the new ideas would cause an eternal journey to unfold. You didn't say, I will find an idea and I will go to it and complete it and be done. You said, I will put myself in a position where my life inspires continuing new ideas so that my journey eternally continues. So, your journey really is of your creation. But of course, you had clear intentions when you came forth into this physical body. You intended for this journey to be satisfying and exhilarating and fun. You intended for it to be uplifting for you and for others. But you never planned to get it done. We like to say to our physical friends, when you plan a vacation, you know that you are at home, you begin, and you will go to this city and this city and this city and this city, and eventually you'll come back round to home again. And you never say, oh, look, my final destination is home, and I'm already there, so why go? I've already completed this vacation. I will check it off my list. And the reason you don't say that is because you don't take your vacation to get it done. You take it for the fun along the way, for the uplifting things that occur, for the people that you interact with, for the stimulation of thought. You take your vacation for the joy of the journey, you see. And that really is what you intended as you came forth into this experience, to be stimulated by variety to ideas of the kind of things you would like. But it isn't the destination that is what it is all about. The destination is just the reason for the journey. The journey is what life is, you see. Affirmations and visualizations are a wonderful part of the creative process. We like to describe the creative process as a three-step process. And most people don't initially see it quite this way. But once you get a sense of this, your creations come into place often much more quickly. Step one is where you ask for what you want. It's where the contrast helps you to define what it is you want. And of course, you always know more clearly what you do want when you are aware of what you don't want. So the variety is very helpful. In that contrasting experience, these rockets of desires literally shoot forth from you. Step two is Source answers your request. So step one happens without you needing to worry about it or work on it, because life just provides enough variety that desires are naturally born from you. And Source follows that rocket of desire and literally becomes it. In other words, we've written a book called Ask and It Is Given, and we think it is the best title that ever could be given to a book because it speaks of the whole process within the title. When life causes you to ask, it is given. But what happens is you're asking often from your place of knowing more clearly what you don't want. So even though Source knows what you want and becomes a vibrational match to it and calls you incessantly toward it, if you are not a vibrational match to what you are asking for, you can't let it in. You don't allow it, you see. So step three of the process is you must be a vibrational match to your desire. In simpler terms, you can't feel the need for money and the discomfort of lack of money and let the money in. It's a different vibration. If you feel poor, you can't become prosperous even though you're asking for prosperity and even though Source has lined it up for you. You have to be a vibrational match to what you're asking for. And that's why it is so important that you pay attention to the way you feel and you keep reaching for improved feelings of relief so that you can, by reaching for better feelings, coach yourself into vibrational alignment with the very things that you are asking for. So, affirmations or visualizations are really the way that you apply step three. Most people think that they are step one. They think that the affirmation or the visualization is how I ask the universe for what I want. But you've already asked the universe for what you want through the living of life, through the feeling of contrast, through the launching of the rockets of desires. And Source has already answered what you want. The solutions to your problems have already been given. The answers to your questions have already been given. But you must find a way to make yourself to them. And so when you speak an affirmation, when you say, it is my desire to achieve this, and I see myself already having achieved it. Even though at first, when you speak the affirmation, you may not believe it. In time, as you speak it, you come into the allowing of it. And of course, there are many people speaking affirmations who are not receiving what they are speaking because they're using words and wanting the words to make it so. But the universe does not respond to your words. The universe responds to your vibration. And your emotions indicate what your vibration is. So if we were standing in your physical shoes, we would use affirmations to talk ourselves into better and better and better feeling places. So you're using your affirmations just to call you a little bit further from where you are to where you want to be, building your own bridges, so to speak. Creation is such a wonderful thing, and being a deliberate creator is just as good as it gets. Of course, everyone is thinking and therefore offering vibration and therefore attracting. But many people are offering most of their vibration in response to what they're observing. So as they observe what is, they get more of it. As you decide that you want to be a deliberate creator, you begin to more deliberately think about what you want and why you want it. And it's interesting that you can only think about what you want from where you currently stand. That's why you are an eternal creator. So from where you stand, the contrast provides clarity about what you think you want from where you now stand. So you set forth your intentions from where you stand. It's all you can do. But then you stand in a new place. The most wonderful thing about this journey of creation is that as you want something that you don't have, and then you think about it and you speak about it and you visualize around it and you find the feeling place of it until you become a vibrational match to it, then you receive it. And along with that manifestation comes a whole nother set of variety that of course causes you to now know more clearly from where you stand what you now want. And so no one can ever stand in one place and figure out what they're going to want forevermore. It is a constant amending process. So what you do is you appreciate what is right now, while from your now perspective, you continue to amend your decisions about what you now want. And this prolific universe, this abundant universe, you have at your fingertips the energy that creates worlds. There is nothing that you cannot be or do or have. But you can never figure out what you will always be or always have or always do from any one place. It will constantly evolve. That's why this journey is so delicious. As you are living life which inspires within you a desire, and then you take the time to feel your way into vibrational alignment with your desire, only then will that desire be allowed by you into your experience. So once you've allowed it, then if you see others who have not yet figured out how to allow it, you may realize that you can help them by teaching through the clarity of your example that appreciation and feeling good is what puts you in the place of allowing good things to come to you. But if you should see them and then feel bad that they have not yet allowed it, now you have changed your energy, and now you are no longer a vibrational match to what you had allowed either. So feeling bad for others who have not figured it out only causes you to release it from your experience also. It also is a shortage orientation to say that person does not have something because I have it. In other words, there is not a finite amount of abundance, and if you receive it, you are depriving someone else of it. In fact, the opposite is true. When you let the contrast that everyone has surrounding them provide you with an idea of what you want, and then you line up with the idea so that you are in vibrational integrity with this idea or desire, now it must be realized by you. And that is such a wonderful example to offer for others. But if you believe that there is only so much to go around, and you are getting it, First of all, you could not let yourself receive it under those conditions, you see. You must know that there is enough for everyone, and those who are not allowing it into their experience are not being deprived of it because someone else did allow it into their experience. You would never say, I have been well for the last 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 or 60 or 70 years, and I am so well, and those people over there are sick. I think I will be sick for a few years to allow some of those sick people to be well. You don't look at it that way because you know you're not using up the wellness and depriving them of it, and you are not using up the abundance and depriving them of that either. A car that's going 100 miles an hour and hits a tree, it's a bigger problem than a car that's going 5 miles an hour and hits a tree. So what happens in this analogy? What we are saying to you is your desires are what equal the speed or the momentum of this journey. And the tree in this analogy is like the resistance that shows up. Many people believe that when they start bumping up against those obstacles, that they should pull back on their desire. But we want you to understand that you cannot pull back on your desire. You can't slow that down. You can't become less than life has caused you to become. So the work must be releasing the resistance. So it's a wonderful thing when you bump up against something that feels uncomfortable, because it's this opportunity to now feel the discomfort of it and work it into a place of greater comfort. That's how you get rid of those obstacles. That's how you let yourself flow in the way that you want to, you see.
You suggest pushing through obstacles?
We suggest relaxing when you bump up against an obstacle and reaching for a feeling of relief. And reaching for a feeling of relief is not exactly pushing through the obstacle. It's causing the obstacle to morph. It causes the obstacle to reduce. The source energy within you, the being that you truly are, this expanding, evolving being, adores you. And when you find fault with yourself, you create resistance. The source within you, who you really are, loves others. When you find something within them that causes you to hate them or to not love them, you create resistance. So when you are looking for reasons to appreciate or looking for reasons to love, you're actually coming into alignment with who you really are. And you will never be joyful in any moment. You will never feel good in any moment. You will never fulfill your reason for being in any moment. You will never be who you really are unless you are in that state of love. Loving is who you are, you see. Anything less is resistance to who you are. Sometimes, especially when you are little, someone who appreciates you holds you as their object of attention. And when they do, it feels so good because they're tapped into source energy, they're holding you as their object of attention, and they're flooding that wonderful feeling all over you. So then you say, oh, this feels so good. And then you say, I would like you to hold me as your object of attention a lot, and I will do whatever it takes so that you will feel this way about me. But of course, as that little person, you didn't realize that, first of all, they cannot hold you as their constant object of attention, and it's asking a lot to ask them to always be connected to Source when they do it. They might be having a bad moment, and when they hold you as their object of attention when they're having a bad moment, you don't feel their love flooding all over you because they're not connected to it and they're not flooding it all over you. So over this process of looking to other people to find out how you feel about yourself, many times you come around to not feeling very good about yourself because you've been looking for love in all the wrong places. You've been looking to them to love you when sometimes they don't have it to give. They want to love you, but they're having a hard day. You can't jump from the vibration of not liking yourself to the vibration of loving yourself all at once, any more than you can set your radio dial on 6:30 a.m. and hear what's being broadcast from 98.7 FM. The frequencies don't match up. So we would say that the best way to come from loathing oneself, we're going to take an extreme, to loving oneself, is to find relief from the loathing, because loving is too big of a jump. So we would begin looking for things that aren't so bad about ourselves. I don't loathe this about myself. I don't loathe that. I don't actually hate that about me. I do pretty good about that. In other words, we would reach for the best feeling that we could find until we found a feeling of, I'm hoping one day to really like myself. I'm hoping one day to know myself as others seem to say that I am. I'm hoping one day to come into vibrational alignment with who I really am. Once you reach the place of hoping to like yourself, it's pretty easy to get over there by looking for things to appreciate. So we've noticed that most people who have practiced not liking themselves very much for a long time can find an easier way of loving themselves as they just begin practicing loving and appreciating things that are easy for them to love and appreciate. And once they get in the habit of doing that, then it's easier to turn that lens on themselves. And sometimes it's a little shocking when you've practiced not loving yourself for a while. But when you've practiced loving a whole lot of other things, and then you try to love yourself a little bit, you can. The contrast that you so often think you would like to do without is so necessary for the expansion of the idea and for the further becoming of that which is you. And what makes human experience uncomfortable is that the contrast causes you to expand. The larger part of you takes the expansion, but you don't keep up with it because you keep beating the drum of the contrast. In other words, let's say life causes you to know that you don't want to be sick. In other words, something happens and you are sick. In your sickness, you radiate rockets of desires for more wellness, and the non-physical part of you now becomes more well than you have ever been. But if you keep beating the drum of, I don't feel good, or I am declining, then even though your potential for wellness is now greater than it has ever been, as you keep focusing upon the illness and using it as your justification for why you want to be well, you hold yourself apart from the very thing that life has caused you to expand toward, you see. Let's say that you don't have enough money, and in the discomfort of not having enough money, you ask for more money. Even if you do not offer words about it, you are vibrationally asking. You cannot know what you do not want without knowing what you do want. The source energy part of you embraces that knowing of what you do want and becomes it completely. But if you keep beating the drum of not having enough money, complaining about not having enough money, irritated with those who seem to have plenty of money, then you hold yourself in vibrational discord not only with the money, you hold yourself in vibrational discord to the expanded part of you who is living that greater prosperity, you see. It's the separation between you and you that causes your discord, not what anyone else is doing. Words really don't teach. Life experience is the true teacher, and so you teach through the clarity of your own example. Offer your evidence of joy. Look for reasons to feel good and then feel good. Don't pretend that you feel good when you don't. Look for reasons to feel good and feel good. And when you don't feel good, don't pretend that you do. Instead, make it clear to anyone who's asking, I'm not feeling very good and I know what to do about it. I'm going to reach for better feeling thoughts until I do feel good. In other words, be real. Being real is the best way to teach. Being real and being in earnest about feeling good. Being determined to come into alignment with who you are. Make a decision that you want to express as often as you can the wholeness of who you are to whoever you're interacting with. Which means get tuned in, tapped in, turned on. Bring yourself into alignment and then play with people. Don't move into a meeting if you're not in alignment. Get into alignment and then move into a meeting. Don't have an argument and then try to make it better within the argument. Get off to yourself and get feeling better. Tune in to who you are. And then in your state of alignment, co-create with others. If you are looking for a way to tune in to the vibration of who you really are, meditation is a wonderful way of going about it, because When you quiet your mind, you release thoughts, and when you release thoughts, you release resistance. Appreciation is a wonderful way to come into alignment, because when you are looking for something to appreciate, you are deliberately trying to see it through the eyes of that which you truly are. When you get out into nature, it serves you in a similar way, because in nature there is no resistance. In other words, that plant that you are beholding is in alignment with the vibrational nature of its being. It's not thinking thoughts that have it out of alignment. The beasts of the wild are, for the most part, in alignment with who they are. Your domesticated beasts in time to begin to act a little bit like you do. But when you get out into nature, in your observation of it, you are observing alignment. That's why it feels good.
I was in a motel in Montana. I was doing concerts out there, and there on a coffee table in the motel, a little motel, was a book. It said "Think and Grow Rich." It was Napoleon Hill. It was Napoleon Hill's book, "Think and Grow Rich." And I looked at that, and I picked it up, and I was like, hair stood up all over my body. I'd never read anything like that. A few pages in it, and I asked the motel owner, I said, "Can I take this back to my room and read it?" He said, "You can have it." He says, "I'm not interested in it." And then after I read that book, I thought these wonderful principles of success. And I asked Abraham later, after they came, I said, "What was it about that book that turned my life around?" I thought it was the principles of what he was teaching of how to become successful. And Abraham says, what it was is his principles made you believe you could do it. And all it changed in you wasn't the processes that you learned from the book, but the fact that you believed now that you could succeed at making money.
I was 24 years old, and I would say that everything that could possibly be wrong with my life was wrong. I weighed 120 pounds more than I weigh now, and I smoked 2 or 3 packs of cigarettes a day, and I was in a terrible relationship, and I had a job I hated, and so I couldn't think of much. Oh, I didn't like my car either. So I think just about everything was wrong. I'd always struggled with obesity. I was born, even by the end of my first year of life, I was very fat as a child, and I was taken around to different specialists and things because my mother and my brother were skinny, and so there was something going on there. And so by the time I was 24 years old, I weighed over 100 pounds, more than I weigh now. So I weighed 300 some pounds. And in addition, all this other stuff was going on too. And so I went out for a walk one afternoon. It was a winter in New England, and I was walking just kind of thinking about, how am I going to get out of all of this? How am I going to get out of my life? And I stepped on a patch of ice that had some snow over it, and I didn't see the patch of ice, and I stepped on the patch of ice, and my feet shot out from under me, and I went whoomp down on the back of my head on the frozen road, and I hit myself just hard enough that it didn't knock me out. What it did was it kind of knocked me into a state of consciousness that was like nothing else I've ever experienced before. I was present, but I was also, something else was going on. I was kind of like, could see more than I could normally see inside myself. And I think I was laying on the ground for maybe 2 minutes or so. In this 2 minutes, I could see down through all the levels of myself. And I'd never been able to see this before. It was like, I saw why my muscles were tense. I saw that I had all of this fat around my body and my muscles were tense, and that all of the fat and the muscles tenseness was there because I had all of these feelings inside me that I had never opened up to, like all these things I was angry about that I'd never told anybody about, and all these things I was sad about that I'd never told anybody about, and things I was scared about. And it was like I could see the level of the meat, and then I could see down in the level of the emotion, and then I could see down underneath everything that there was this clear space that there was nothing kind of written on it. There was nothing there. It was kind of like a spiritual space or an open space with pure potential. And I saw that all of those feelings and all of that tension and all of that fat was there because I was living somebody else's life, basically. And that I wouldn't have that stuff if I had a different life. And what I mean by that is my father had died before I was born. He died while my mother was pregnant with me. And he was very obese, just like I was. He smoked heavily, had probably not a very good relationship with my mother, and I know they had a lot of struggles. And so he died in the midst of, while I was gestating, and so I never actually knew him in the world. But I had sort of taken on his life. That's what I could see down inside myself, that it wasn't even my life. And so it was an incredible moment. I think I'd never had anything like that because I always thought this was the reality. This was all there was, you know, and I'd never had a moment of awakening to spirit. And I think that, you know, I always say it is that if you're open, the universe will teach you by tickling you with a feather. But if you're not open, it has to hit you with a sledgehammer. Well, I was so closed that this was like getting hit by a sledgehammer. That was the only way I could learn what I needed to learn, I guess. And so I was in that altered state of consciousness for about 2 minutes, I think. And I began to come back to regular consciousness. I could feel my muscles kind of assembling their tension, and I could feel my awareness of all of this obesity around me. And I could still feel, though, that very sweet open space down in there, that sweet open spiritual space that didn't have anything on it. And as I was coming back to regular consciousness, I had these several thoughts that were very different from anything I'd ever thought. One thought was, I'm going to find out what I can do to feel that clear space all the time. And I thought, I'm going to do what I can to find out how to live that way, how to feel that all the time in my life. And the other thought I had was, I'm going to live my own life. I don't have to live my father's life or anybody's life. I can invent my own life. And if that's possible, how do I want it to be? And so as I was coming back to regular consciousness, I made a commitment to feeling that spiritual space all the time, and then to invent a healthy body, basically, and invent a great life. So I make this new commitment to, I really want to learn how to feel spirit all the time, just in ordinary life. And a friend of mine came over to my house one afternoon and said that one of his old Harvard professors had just come back from India and was giving a talk down the road about 30 miles at his father's house. And did I want to come and hear him? And I said, well, what's he talking about? And he said, well, he'd gone to India and he'd kind of gotten enlightened, and he was talking about yoga and meditation. And I thought, well, that sounds kind of interesting, you know, maybe I'll go. And so we go down there, and there is this guy in a robe, a white robe, and there's all these devotees around. And I remember a girl came up and offered us fruit from a fruit bowl, you know, and I was thinking, what is this? You know, is this some cult or something? Well, it turned out to be Ram Dass, who was Neil's Harvard professor. Under those days, he was named Richard Alpert, and when Neil had taken his course at Harvard, and now he was named Ram Dass. And so Ram Dass had just come back from India, and he was just totally, you know, he was so blissed out and everything. And part of me related to it, but another part of me thought, what are these people selling? You know, like, I was very cynical about that kind of thing at the time. And so I went up after the talk and asked Ram Dass, I said, look, I got to tell you, I'm very skeptical about this kind of stuff. This looks sort of insane to me, but since I'm here, I just had this experience where I fell on the ice, and I told him the experience. And I said, so I want to learn how to feel that clear feeling in me all the time, just in ordinary life. I felt it for a minute while I was sort of knocked out, but I'd like to feel it all the time without bashing my head on the ice. And I remember he looked up at me for a long time, and just sort of looked at me up and down. and he said, you should do some breathing exercises. And I said, breathing exercises? And he said, yeah. And I said, well, what do you mean by that? I never heard of anything like that. And he said, well, in India, if you have a problem, you might do some yoga around it or some breathing around it. And it's as valid a way as talking to a therapist about it. And so I said, well, where do you get something like this? And he said, well, just be open to it. It'll come to you. And I said, all right. And so the next day, I was down at the grocery store and in the checkout line. So I was, pushing my cart up through the checkout line, and they had a little kiosk of paperback books, a little round kiosk of paperback books. And I glanced down, and there is a book called Yoga, Youth, and Reincarnation. I'll never forget this, by Jess Stern. And I can see the cover just like it's sitting right here now. And I remember looking at this, okay, Yoga, Youth, and Reincarnation. All right, that's interesting. And so I picked it up, and I open it up, and there's an entire chapter on breathing exercises, pranayama. So here I go in one day from never having heard of something to Ram Dass telling me, be open to it, to there it is in my hand. And so I bought it. And so I took it home, and I just started doing the exercises all the way through. I remember it was a Saturday afternoon, and my wife and baby were gone to visit her mother, who lived about maybe 40 miles away. And so I had the place to myself. And I just started doing these exercises right out of the book. I would do one and then flip the page and do another one. So I started about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. By about midnight, and after doing all of these breathing and yoga exercises and chanting and everything like that, I was in touch with that same space that I'd felt when I bashed myself on the ice falling down. And so there it was, there was a whole different way to get there. I had lost about 75 pounds, so I was sort of, I could feel what could happen, if this actually came true, if the dream really came true. And this friend of mine that I'd known years before showed up for a visit, and he and I were both sort of eating buddies, in those days. We would go out for an ice cream sundae or something. We worked at the same place, and we were both obese. And he was still, a 300-pounder, and I'd gotten down to a real slim 225 or something like that, And so he looked at me. I remember I opened the door, and he looked at me, and he said, God, what are you doing, and what happened to you? And I tried to explain this thing that I was going through. And I remember the way he looked at me. And it's probably it's probably like a lot of people when they start some kind of a change process, the people that are in their lives sort of don't know how to relate to it. And so what he did, this was so bizarre, he went into town and he brought back a 5-pound box of chocolate caramels, which was like the ultimate bad food for me, during that time, And but it was like he walked in the door, and he was a practical joker. I mean, this was partly a practical joke, but I could see the sort of mean edge to it, of kind of wanting to sabotage and wanting to kind of get me to be the way I was. And I realized if I was going to have to, that I didn't have any way to relate to him. And so I basically had to throw him out of my house, leave, please leave. And he did. And what an amazing... 6 months later, I got a call from a friend of mine and said, are you sitting down? I said, yeah. And he said, Ken died. He had a heart attack and died. And he was 26 years old, which was, and I saw in that moment how that was me. So that was a wake-up moment for me and a way of saying, life has very serious consequences. Choices have very serious consequences. After that year, I moved to California for a few years and went to graduate school. And so over the next few years, I pretty much felt good all the time, and I could see well, and my weight stabilized and all of that. And I hadn't ever worked out the whole relationship aspect of life, and I continued to have kind of one relationship after the other of, they'd get to a certain point and then they would fall apart. I would usually start finding fault with the person, or the other person would find fault with me, and we'd never be able to work beyond a certain point with our relationship. And so one magic day, I remember setting the intention of, oh, I learned how to see. I learned how to be an okay weight. I learned how to live healthy, free of addictions. I learned how to eat well. How come it didn't occur to me that I could do that with loving? It had never occurred to me that I could actually design my own life around love and relationships. And so that was a big revelation to me, the idea that the same process could work. And so I began to work with this idea of enjoying a flow of love in my life, and that love comes to me. I don't have to pursue it. And as I began to work with that, I had this other amazing insight. In fact, I was walking down the street in San Francisco. I remember in downtown San Francisco with a woman that I'd been with for a year or so, and we always had the same complaint with each other. Her complaint about me was that I was not in touch with my feelings, and that I never communicated about anything important, that I never would talk about the real stuff, And I, of course, had my defenses against that, that I forget what they were, but I had my good justification for why I didn't talk about my feelings and didn't talk about things that were important. My complaint about her was that she was super critical. And so whenever she would get going with me about, we never talk about anything important, or you're never in touch with your feelings, I would say, well, I would be if you weren't so darn critical, and it would get us into this loop then. And I was walking down the street with her in San Francisco, and I realized, I don't know where this insight came from, but I suddenly realized that, oh, I create that. I'm the one that creates and has created my life so that I'm in relationship with a very critical person. And up until that moment, I thought it was their problem, that I just happened to have the bad luck of always ending up with a critical woman. And so I remember stopping on the street kind of to think about this, and she said, what's going on? And I was kind of trying to share this insight with her, and she wasn't having any part of it, by the way. She was not buying my little insight at all. And so the other awareness that I had in that moment was that the very thing that I complained about all the time, and this is true for everybody, I think, that the very thing we complain about over and over is the very thing that we're creating happening. In other words, we got this loop going of not realizing that we draw certain experiences into our life and then going around complaining about that all the time. So anything you complain about repetitively is something that you have an unconscious intention to produce. And so that hit me like a ton of bricks. I suddenly realized, oh, I require a critical woman in my life. That's me dreaming up that dream. And my next thought was, well, I think I'll dream up a better dream. I'll dream up a dream of being surrounded by loving and supportive people. And that was really a big moment for me, because nobody in the history of my family that I know of has ever had a successful relationship besides me and Katie. In other words, up until that moment, my parents had a disastrous relationship. My grandparents, just about everybody, everywhere I looked in the family, was full of people who either they had a very kind of like a routine relationship, they went through the certain roles, or they managed to stay in a long-term relationship through the regular application of vodka and other kinds of things that allowed them to stay put, you know. I realized that it would be breaking absolutely radical new ground if I was able to create a relationship that worked, that would be an unthinkable thing to do. And what better thing to make happen, you know, than something completely unthinkable. And so I sat down on the floor of my apartment at the time and designed what I wanted in a close relationship in my mind. And honesty, a relationship where both of us were free to pursue our creativity, our creative callings, and that each of us took full responsibility for our lives so that we didn't get into blaming each other. So if something came up, we would just say, why did I create that, you know? And so I remember saying to the universe at the time, that's what I want, and if it's not in the cards for me to have that, I'll be alone. I'm fine with being alone, but I promise I will never settle for less. And I think that little thing I said at the end kind of cracked the whip. You know, it said, that's what I'm about here. And so from that moment, it only took a month until Katie came into my life. And one of the great moments of my life was my first meeting with her, because she came up to me to ask me a question. I was actually giving a seminar at the graduate school where she was getting her PhD, and she was also one of the instructors there at the school. She was the movement therapy instructor and taught some of the classes there, and she was also getting her PhD. And so she came up to ask me a question during this seminar I was giving. I don't remember what the question is to this day, but I said to her, I'm very attracted to you. I just want to let you know that. And I said, but I also want to let you know that I'm only interested in relationships where both people speak honestly to each other, and both people take responsibility for their lives, and both people are committed to their creativity. And on those terms, would you like to have a cup of coffee with me? And it was kind of I'd never said anything like that in my life. You know, it was a totally outrageous thing to say, especially given the context of what was going on. And so I remember the look on her face. She kind of went like this. You know, it's like, cogitate, cogitate, compute, does not compute. And suddenly she said, okay. And I can do that. And so, you know, that was our first meeting and basically set the tone for our whole last 27 years together.